Welcome to 10 Minutes a Day, a daily reading of the Catholic Church's social encyclicals. Today we continue with Pacem and Terris, written by Pope John XXIII in 1963. As a further consequence of man's nature, he has the right to the private ownership of property, including that of productive goods. This, as we have said elsewhere, is a right which constitutes so efficacious a means of asserting one's personality and exercising responsibility in every field, and an element of solidity and security for family life, and of greater peace and prosperity in the state. Finally, it is opportune to point out that the right to own private property entails a social obligation as well. Men are by nature social, and consequently have the right to meet together and to form associations with their fellows. They have the right to confer on such associations the type of organization which they consider best calculated to achieve their objectives. They also have the right to exercise their own initiative and act on their own responsibility within these associations for the attainment of the desired results. As we insisted in our encyclical Mater et Magistra, the founding of a great many such intermediate groups or societies for the pursuit of aims which it is not within the competence of the individual to achieve efficiently is a matter of great urgency. Such groups and societies must be considered absolutely essential for the safeguarding of man's personal freedom and dignity while leaving intact a sense of responsibility. Again, every human being has the right to freedom of movement and of residence within the confines of his own state. When there are just reasons in favor of it, he must be permitted to emigrate to other countries and take up residence there. The fact that he is a citizen of a particular state does not deprive him of membership in the human family, nor of citizenship in the universal society, the common worldwide fellowship of men. Finally, man's personal dignity involves his right to take an active part in public life and to make his own contribution to the common welfare of his fellow citizens. As Pope Pius XII said, man, as such, far from being an object or, as it were, an inert element in society, is rather its subject, its basis, and its purpose, and so must he be esteemed. As a human person, he is entitled to the legal protection of his rights, and such protection must be effective, unbiased, and strictly just. To quote again Pope Pius XII, in consequence of that juridical order willed by God, man has his own unalienable right to juridical security. To him is assigned a certain well-defined sphere of law, immune from arbitrary attack. The natural rights of persons The natural rights of which we have so far been speaking are inextricably bound up with as many duties, all applying to one and the same person. These rights and duties derive their origin, their sustenance, and their indestructibility from the natural law, which, in conferring the one, imposes the other. Thus, for example, the right to live involves the duty to preserve one's life, the right to a decent standard of living, the duty to live in a becoming fashion, the right to be free to seek out the truth, the duty to devote oneself to an ever deeper and wider search for it. Once this is admitted, it follows that in human society, one man's natural right gives rise to a corresponding duty in other men. The duty, that is, of recognizing and respecting that right. Every basic human right draws its authoritative force from the natural law, which confers it, and attaches to it its respective duty. Hence, to claim one's rights and ignore one's duties, or only half fulfill them, is like building a house with one hand and tearing it down on the other. Since men are social by nature, they must live together and consult each other's interests. That men should recognize and perform their respective rights and duties is imperative to a well-ordered society. But the result will be that each individual will make his wholehearted contribution to the creation of a civic order in which rights and duties are ever more diligently and more effectively observed. For example, it is useless to admit that a man has a right to the necessities of life, unless we also do all in our power to supply him with the means sufficient for his livelihood. Hence, society must not only be well ordered, it must also provide men with abundant resources. This postulates not only the mutual recognition and fulfillment of rights and duties, but also the involvement and collaboration of all men in the many enterprises which our present civilization makes possible, encourages, or indeed demands. Man's personal dignity requires, besides, that he enjoy freedom and be able to make up his own mind when he acts. In his association with his fellows, therefore, there's every reason why his recognition of rights, observance of duties, and many-sided collaboration with other men should be primarily a matter of his own personal decision. Each man should act on his own initiative, conviction, and sense of responsibility, not under the constant pressure of external coercion or enticement. There is nothing human about a society that is welded together by force. Far from encouraging, as it should, the attainment of man's progress and perfection, it is merely an obstacle to his freedom. Hence, before society can be considered well-ordered, creative, and consonant with human dignity, it must be based on truth. St. Paul expressed this as follows: "Putting away lying, speak ye the truth every man with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." And so it will be, if each man acknowledges sincerely his own rights and his own duties towards others. Human society, as we here picture it, demands that men be guided by justice, respect the rights of others, and do their duty. It demands, too, that they be animated by such love as will make them feel the needs of others as their own, and induce them to share their goods with others, and to strive in the world to make all men alike heirs to the noblest of intellectual and spiritual values. Nor is this enough, for human society thrives on freedom, namely on the use of means which are consistent with the dignity of its individual members, who, being endowed with reason, assume responsibility for their own actions. And so, dearest sons and brothers, we must think of human society as being primarily a spiritual reality. By its means, enlightened men can share their knowledge of the truth, can claim their rights and fulfill their duties, receive encouragement in their aspirations for the goods of the Spirit, share their enjoyment of all wholesome pleasures of the world, strive continually to pass on to others all that is best in themselves, and to make their own the spiritual riches of others. It is these spiritual values which exert a guiding influence on culture, economics, social institutions, political movements and forms, laws, and all the other components which go on to make up the external community of men and its continual development. Now, the order which prevails in human society is wholly incorporeal in nature. Its foundation is truth, and it must be brought into effect by justice. It needs to be animated and perfected by men's love for one another, and, while preserving freedom intact, it must make for an equilibrium in society which is increasingly more human in character. But such an order, universal, absolute, and immutable in its principles, finds in its source the true, personal, and transcendent God. He is the first truth, the sovereign good, and as such the deepest source from which human society, if it is to be properly constituted, creative, and worthy of man's dignity, draws its genuine vitality. This is what St. Thomas means when he says, "Human reason is the standard which measures the degree of goodness of the human will, and as such it derives from the eternal law, which is divine reason. Hence, it is clear that the goodness of the human will depends much more on the eternal law than on human reason." There are three things which characterize our modern age. In the first place, we notice a progressive improvement on the economic and social condition of working men. They began by claiming their rights principally in the economic and social spheres, and proceeded to lay claim to their political rights as well. Finally, they have turned their attention to acquiring the more cultural benefits of society. Today, therefore, working men all over the world are loud in their demands that they should in no circumstances be subjected to arbitrary treatment, as though devoid of intelligence and freedom. They insist on being treated as human beings with a share in every sector of human society, in the socio-economic sphere, in government, and the realm of learning and culture. Secondly, the part that women are now playing in political life is everywhere evident. This is a development that is perhaps of swifter growth among Christian nations, but is also happening extensively, if more slowly, among nations that are heirs to different traditions and imbued with a different culture. Women are gaining an increasing awareness of their natural dignity, for far from being content with a purely passive role or allowing themselves to be regarded as a kind of instrument, they are demanding both in domestic and in public life the rights and duties which belong to them as human persons. Finally, we are confronted in this modern age with a form of society which is evolving on entirely new social and political lines. Since all peoples have either attained political independence or are on the way to attaining it, soon no nation will rule over another, and none will be subject to an alien power. Thus, all over the world, men are either citizens of an independent state or are shortly to become so, nor is any nation nowadays content to submit to foreign domination. The long-standing inferiority complex of certain classes because of their economic and social status, sex, or position in the state, and the corresponding superiority complex of other classes is rapidly becoming a thing of the past.